In reading the Old Testament, you've probably noticed the mention of men like Abraham and David having concubines. Dr. McGee received a letter from Pacific Grove, California, and it said, in the dictionary, a concubine is defined as a woman living with a man without legal marriage. And yet the Bible says that God was pleased with Abraham, and David was a man after God's own heart, and yet they both had plural wives and concubines. Why didn't God condemn them for this? He certainly would condemn a Christian for doing that today. What is the difference between living together without marriage today and back then?
I don't know whether you're asking this to justify something or other or not, but may I say to you, I get the feeling that you haven't read the Bible very carefully. Where did you get the idea that God blessed Abraham so much? Haven't you read that when Abraham broke over and took that maid Hagar, and she had a son, and Abraham saw that little fella grow up there in the camp, but God could not accept that little fella because it was actually sin on his part, on Abraham's part, and Sarah's part. And when Sarah gave birth to Isaac, why, she said to Abraham, you get this kid and his mama out of here. He's not going to inherit with my child, and I don't want him here. And Abraham, that's his son, his firstborn son, was Ishmael, and he put him out. You think that broke his heart? It certainly did break his heart, because he went into God and said, oh God, that Ishmael might live before you. God says, I can't accept that thing that was conceived in sin. I get the idea that some people don't read the Bible when they can't see that God condemned Abraham for that sin that he committed. Now, don't tell me that God favored all of that. God did not favor it at all. God blessed Abraham in the things that related to the covenant God made with him, and in those things that Abraham was faithful. But when Abraham sinned, God took him to the woodshed. Now you want to talk about David, how God blessed him? Did you know from the day that David even committed that sin with Bathsheba, from that day to his dying day, he never knew a moment's peace in his home. You talk about the home life of God's people. The home life of David was a disgrace. Read the story. It's an awful story. And it was a heartbreak to this man, David. May I say to you, David never knew a moment's peace. And when that boy Absalom was slain, he wanted that boy to be the king to follow him. But God wasn't going to have it that way. May I say to you, don't get the impression that when God said this is a man after my own heart, that he's talking about his sin, because God dealt with his sin. May I say to you, I do want to rebuke you, because there's so many others out there just like you that need to be rebuked today. Read the Word of God correct. And when you read the Word of God correct, why, you'll find out that God deals with sins like this. Let me add this further word. I was a pastor in downtown Los Angeles where I saw people from all walks of life. I was there at the end of World War II, and I saw the return of the soldiers. I saw the sins that were being committed and the sins of Hollywood, and people getting saved afterward, and many people turned to Christ. And you know, there was one thing I watched. God sure did take care of those that sinned. The stories I could tell you about how God deals with those. I happen to know, friends, that you don't get by with it. And if you think that living together today, you're going to get by with it without getting married, there are too many tragic stories that are coming out of that already. I have one story that I'll tell you, because this is so important today to get straight on. When I was down at Boca Raton several years ago when the hippies were going great guns, a little girl came into me and a boy, and she had a baby on her hip. You know how the hippies used to carry their kids on their hip, straddle a little fellow on the hip. And so they wanted to talk to me about going to the mission field. And I suspected something, and I said, are you married? And they said, no. And I said, well, what in the world do you want to do? Take sin out to the mission field? Get your own life straightened out. And the little girl says, we love each other. Well, maybe they did. But that's not going to last. And the interesting thing, it didn't last. 3 years went by, and one day, again, I was at Boca Raton, and this little girl came up and a little boy with her. The little fella was about 40 years old, I guess. And I said, "Where's your husband?" She says, "I don't have a husband." I said, "Where was the fella that you lived with?" And she said, "Well, he's left." Said, "We decided that we weren't for each other, and so he's left." I said, "What are you going to do with this little fella?" She says, "I'm going to try to raise him." And I said, "Is it difficult?" She began to cry. And she said, "It's the hardest thing in the world for me to raise this little fella." I said, "Well, the music's over now, isn't it? There'd be no more dancing. The fun is gone." I said, "You can't go against God and get by with it." I asked a man there in Boca to see if he couldn't get a job, a waitress in a restaurant. And he got her that job. I don't know what happened to her. I was in that restaurant later on, a year or two later after that. She was not there. I don't know what happened to the poor little girl. But may I say to you, you don't get by with it. And these today that are living high, especially in the Hollywood crowd, because I taught that Hollywood Christian group many years ago, and I saw them go high and then see them come down low, too. And they'll come down. God sees to that, and that's his department. I'm going to let him take care of them.